Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and the words President Donald Trump are three of the most volatile, contentious words on the American scene today. Overwhelmingly, Americans have a strong, visceral reaction to the 45th President of the United States. There are those Americans who love him, and there are those Americans who absolutely despise the man, who see him as evil incarnate. And many of those who view him this way are Jews. Back in August of 2017, 8 months ago, the AJC's annual survey of Jewish opinion found that 77% of American Jews disapproved of President Trump. The AJC survey also found that the more observant Jewish communities were, the more they supported Donald Trump. 71% of Orthodox Jews said they approve of the president, while only 8% of Reform Jews view the president favorably. But while American Jews, especially the vast number of liberal, non-observant Jews, overwhelmingly disapprove of the president, so that he can do no right, even when it comes to recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital. In contrast, a recent Gallup poll in Israel shows that 67% of Israelis approve of the American president and consider him to be a significant improvement over his predecessor, Barack Obama. Does it matter that the majority of American Jews detest Donald Trump, while a majority of Israelis feel Donald Trump has been good for Israel? Does it matter that the overwhelmingly liberal American Jewish community routinely votes Democrat, while the Prime Minister of Israel and the current coalition government in Israel embrace Donald Trump? Well, in a recent keynote speech in Jerusalem, one very prominent American Jewish leader said it matters enormously. Arnie Eisen, Chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, the conservative movement's rabbinical school, and the institutional center of conservative Judaism, believes that the Israeli government's embrace of Donald Trump has widened the gulf between American Jewry's vast, liberal, non-observant community and the State of Israel, which Arnie Eisen characterizes as a right-wing, increasingly Orthodox, religious stronghold. Quoting Arnie Eisen, "When Donald Trump does his most detestable things, such as his response to Charlottesville, the one government in the world which most stands up and applauds him publicly is the government of the State of Israel. This is very hard for us as American Jews," says Arnie Eisen. Now, for the record, Mr. Netanyahu and no Israeli leader actually applauded anything Donald Trump did or did not say regarding Charlottesville. But Arnie Eisen's larger point is that Donald Trump is guilty of anti-Semitism and racism, but that the State of Israel tolerates both so long as the president supports Israel. And from Arnie Eisen's perspective, this is an embarrassment to the vast majority of American Jews, and as the headline in the Times of Israel puts it, Arnie Eisen's message is that Donald Trump delegitimizes American Jewry, that together with Israel's ultra-Orthodox establishment's sweeping dismissal of American Jewry, the Israeli support of Donald Trump makes American Jews feel delegitimized by Israel and less connected to the Jewish state. So how accurate is Arnie Eisen's analysis that American Jewry feels embarrassed and alienated from Israel because of Israeli support of Donald Trump? And if that's true, what does it say about American Jewry? For some analysis, I am so pleased to be joined once again by a wonderful panel of thoughtful, committed individuals. Let me reintroduce them to you. Joining me at my side again is the award-winning author and novelist Thane Rosenbaum, Distinguished Fellow at NYU Law School and the Director of the Forum on Law, Culture, and Society. Eric Yoffie is President Emeritus of the Union for Reform Judaism, an columnist who can be read in Haaretz, the Huffington Post, and online at ericyoffie.com. Betty Ehrenberg is a longtime Jewish and Israeli activist who presently serves as Executive Director of the World Jewish Congress of North America. And Dovid Efune is the Editor-in-Chief of the Allgemeiner and Director of the parent nonprofit organization, the Gershon Jacobson Foundation. It is such a joy to be joined by all four of you. Thank you so much for being here. Eric, I want to begin with you.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, so to what extent does the perspective that Arnie Eisen expressed in Jerusalem resonate with you? To what extent do you think Israel's support of Donald Trump has injured American Jewish connection to the Jewish state?
I wasn't comfortable with his formulation of the issue.
Interesting.
My own sense is the government of Israel has to develop strong relations with the American president, no matter who that president may be. If that president is a problematic president, if that president is a supportive president, it makes no difference. Strong relations are essential. Israel cannot exist without the ongoing support of the government of the United States. So any suggestion that there would be an alternative for Israel in terms of their embrace of an American president, I found to be strange. Mm-hmm. There are other issues to be considered here. I mean, I would be much quicker, for example, to raise a question of whether or not the government of Israel had developed appropriate ties with the other side of the political spectrum, since bipartisan support is also essential for Israel's survival. And I think there are legitimate criticisms in that regard. But I would not be pointing the finger because they want good, strong relations with the president, albeit a problematic president from many perspectives.
Okay. And just to follow up, within the Reform Jewish community, there is such dissatisfaction, what Arnie Eisen says, despise, detest. Do you feel that it has exacerbated feelings of alienation within the Reform Jewish movement for Israel?
Reform Jews, generally speaking, do detest Trump. I mean, in other words, we have data in that regard. I am very reluctant to jump from there to the notion that that means that they're pulling back from Israel. If you have a problem with President Trump and you have a problem with his positions, if you're a committed Jew, you throw yourself into the fight. And you embrace Israel as you have been doing, and you say, I work for change because change is necessary. I don't accept the notion that Trump is leading American Jews into abandoning Israel. I think relations between American Jews and Israel have to be considered separately.
Okay. Thane, it's interesting to me. Eric is not comfortable with Arnie Eisen's formulation.
Aren't you surprised by that?
I am. I have to say, I'm a little surprised, and because he says it so beautifully, I'm very impressed, as I always am. But I want to hear from your perspective. What was your reaction to Arnie Eisen's position, and how do you view Trump, American Jewry in Israel?
Well, in some ways, I'm not surprised by it, because it's typical of a kind of liberal Jewish perspective on Israel, which is to say, I've written about this in the past, it's a kind of moral narcissism, as if to say, Israel has an obligation to do things that make me proud of it. And if you do things that make me unproud of you, unfavored of you, you know, I will distance myself from you. I will lose my love. My love is very conditional. And you need to do the things that make me feel morally righteous about my affection for you. So to me, this is a very similar argument, right? We've seen this with respect to settlements. We've seen this within the failure of the two-state peace process, where liberal Jews have said, look, I can no longer feel the same feelings toward you. Here, it's a little... Yeah.
You are a liberal Jew.
Of course, of course.
You and Eric are both two of the strongest liberal voices on the American Jewish scene.
I'm just not crazy.
What's interesting, however, is...
I mean, I'm liberal, but not crazy.
The fact that you take the positions you do on Israel, for some people means you're not so liberal.
I know. I'm constantly pegged as a conservative, and I'm always surprised by that. I have real strong liberal gravitas, bona fides. No, to me, this is also, there's a kind of chutzpah also in this, in addition to, I would say, the moral narcissism. I mean, what, you know, who are we to tell the Israelis? I'm never, and I've said this on your show many times, I'm never comfortable telling Israelis what they should and should not do, especially with respect to what's in their interest. Eric is quite right. I mean, what's in their interest is to have an open line of communication with the President of the United States. Did Arnie Eisen expect Israel to condemn President Trump? What foreign leader would do that? Why? What interest? In order to what? Make Arnie Eisen happy? To make liberal Jews? Look at our country. They told Trump to go to hell, right? That's who nobody would do. There's nothing diplomatic about that. But the idea that we would tell the Israelis, you have to love our politicians the way we love them. And that you can't have... Or opposite. Yeah, or the opposite. You have to despise them. We want you to be in alignment with the way 65% of us, 77%. And if not, that's just terrible for our relationship. We're not going to love you. We're going to distance ourselves. I mean, you know, we don't tell the French that they shouldn't like Woody Allen. You know, we don't go to other countries and say to them, you know...
But the other countries don't matter. No, Israel matters in a different way.
I know, but again, it's still the same idea that we're asking the Israelis to project their affections in the same way, or their sense of negative feelings about a president, based on what a large segment of American Jews may feel. And that's the part that's really strange.
Very good, very interesting. Dovid, part of what Arnie Eisen said was that Donald Trump does not condemn either anti-Semitism or racism. The implication is he may not be an anti-Semite or racist. Then again, maybe he might be from Arnie Eisen's perspective, but he has tolerated anti-Semitism and racism. I want you to speak in general about the overall question. What's your reaction to Arnie Eisen's formulation? But I also want you to speak to whether you believe the Trump administration has displayed serious anti-Semitism or serious racism that you would expect American Jews, if not the State of Israel, to condemn.
Look, I think there are two categories when it comes to pushing leaders on the subject of anti-Semitism. There are those leaders that are anti-Semitic or who are implementing or implementing anti-Semitic policies, and there are those that are not doing enough to fight the scourge of anti-Semitism. I think Donald Trump quite squarely fits into the second category. There's a lot more that he needs to do. There's a lot more he needs to say. Certainly, his approach to Charlottesville was defensive and juvenile and the wrong approach. And he was roundly criticized even by the Republican Jewish coalition for that response. The effect, though, in terms of how our community thinks about what to say and how to approach those leaders, I think has to be very different. If someone is an anti-Semite, they deserve to be ostracized and criticized and called out, etc. If someone is not doing enough, certainly if we're talking about the President of the United States, I think the approach has to be more encouraging, supportive. There's no problem with the use of strong language, but not one of outright condemnation and isolation and rejectionism. What can we do to assist in your efforts to understand this issue better and to approach it with more maturity and more effectiveness? And the Jewish community has incredible resources at its disposal to be able to say to administration leaders, here are the resources we have, here is the data we have, here are the tools we'd like to see used, whether they're social media tools or other tools, and get engaged, roll up their sleeves and get engaged in the fight together and try and coerce, cajole, encourage administration leaders.
By the way, your response is so mature and so level-headed. I don't see that happening anywhere on the American scene today. I see only overreaction, hyperbole. People are foaming at the mouth. There's no attempt to sort of bring a reasoned, moderate approach that you encourage. I haven't seen it. I don't see it in general right now, and I certainly haven't seen it within the American community as it applies to things that might upset Americans that Donald Trump either says or does. Can you tell me why you think there hasn't been more expression of the approach you just articulated in the Jewish community?
Well, I think the unfortunate reality is that today we're seeing an environment that entails what you might call the politicization of everything. If you talk about Reformed Jews, right, the reason they hate Trump is not because of his views on Israel. There are a whole lot of other issues that are much higher up on their checklist, which influence their perspective on the American president. And I think, yes, part of overcoming the politicization of everything, right, it's a tough word to get out, and this polarization that we see as a result of it is, yes, listening to the other side and engaging with the other side and respecting the person with the other view, even if you don't respect the view, but also trying to take a slightly more nuanced approach and recognizing that no one person is all bad or all good. And yes, while one might have criticism of the president, to recognize that on certain issues of very broad consensus, he has been the best president that we have ever had. And I'm talking about the issue of Jerusalem, which is a bipartisan issue for Jews in this country and in Israel. I'm talking about the issue of Iran, which is a bipartisan issue of concern for Jews in this country and in Israel. The issue of payments to terrorists, another bipartisan issue. And of course, the bias against Israel at the United Nations, where we have seen an unprecedented approach from the U.S. administration. So for liberal Jews to come and say, listen, we have a lot of problems with the president. We have political problems. We have problems with his approach to anti-Semitism. But we appreciate and respect this work that he's done, I think would help to turn down the conversation a notch.
I haven't heard that articulated. Have you?
I haven't.
Okay. Last thing, Arnie Eisen tries to make a distinction between how liberal, non-observant Jews react both to Trump and to Israel's embrace of Trump, and how the more observant Orthodox community does support Trump. You have any insight there, and do you think Arnie Eisen is describing things accurately?
I think he is describing things accurately. I think there are real numbers that show this, that more Orthodox Jews take a more conservative perspective on the world. Certainly his commutation of Sholem Rubashkin's sentence turned Donald Trump into some kind of messiah in the Orthodox Jewish community. I mean, people could not believe, the response to that was just unbelievable.
But you should identify him for our audience.
So this was the former CEO of the largest kosher meatpacking plant in the United States, who was arrested some 8-9 years ago on charges of bank fraud and also immigration violations. The immigration violation charges were dropped, and the bank fraud charges were pressed as hard as they could be pressed, and he was put away, I think it was 27 years or 29 years. There was a very broad bipartisan effort to have that sentence commuted, saying that it was harsher than the Enron sentence and whatnot. There was a strong feeling in the Orthodox community that it was that there was a bigoted undertone to his prosecution. And the fact that his sentence was commuted after 8 years was a source of a lot of jubilation in the Orthodox community.
Okay,
and certainly even further elevated their view of the president.
Interesting. Betty, you have a unique perspective here. You can respond any way you want. I am interested in the extent to which you were comfortable or uncomfortable with the way that Arnie Eisen framed the issue. And I'd also like to hear you talk about the extent to which different facets of American Jewry do or do not relate to Israel because of Donald Trump.
We have spoken about it here many times, that there are many segments in the American Jewish community that don't feel as close to Israel as we would like. We've spoken about the fervent feeling for Zionism that we had, that all of us grew up with, that seems to be missing. And so this preceded the election of Donald Trump for a long time. We've been worried about this issue now for years. So I don't think Arnie Eisen's evaluation of this is correct. And I do agree with Eric that Israel will embrace an American president, because America, no matter who is the president, doesn't matter who the president is, America is Israel's strongest ally in the world. And there are two sister democracies, and they will work together, whether things are a little better or a little worse or a little easier or a little more difficult. This was true of other presidents as well. No president, no American president was a walk in the park for Israel. We've talked about that as well. So I think to blame the status of the closeness of the American Jewish community to a president is a mistake. I think something that Thane touched on, really elaborated on, is very important, which is our tendency in America. First of all, as Americans, we like to transfer our views and our values on others and on other countries. We do this all the time, whether we think we can turn Iraq into a Jeffersonian democracy or whatever. That's just one example, but we've done this all over the world, and we've said it to Israelis umpteen million times. Why don't you do it the way we do, whatever the thing is, whatever the X is, the way we do it in America. In America, we do this differently and more effectively, and so on. But there's a specific attitude in the feeling in the American Jewish community. It could be even in other Jewish communities, that is, well, unless Israelis believe, are held up to a certain moral standard that is commensurate with mine and sees things the way that I see things, then I'm not going to love Israel as much as I should or as much as really is required. And that's a problem. That's an old problem. It's a problem of fault-finding. It's a problem of fault-finding that the Jewish people did in the Holy Land in the days of the spies, for which we paid very, very dearly. Israel should be the way I want it to be. It's different, a little different now, not exactly the same thing, but I think it's connected. And the time that that the Jews in the desert were afraid of going to someplace new and someplace challenging and someplace scary for many reasons and unknown, we found fault with. And today, I think it's also true. There is a strong call, a Zionist imperative for us to send our kids to Israel, be educated in Israel, go on trips to Israel, and for many American Jews and non-American Jews to make Aliyah eventually, because that is a Zionist value. So what do? We say, well, Israel really should be like this before I commit to it wholehearted. And we have a concept in Judaism, you all know it well, it's called ahava hatluya b'davar, a love that is conditional, which is a phrase also that Thane mentioned. Well, there are certain aspects in life, there are certain relationships in life that demand our love and not to be conditional. I love my family unconditionally. I love my wife, my husband, my children unconditionally. And I think what was demanded of us in the days of the spies and even now, Israel, I don't love Israel, not for the cause of that she'll be the way that I wish she were. Israel will never be the way everybody wants her to be. Israel, we would like all Israel to be the way each of us, the 5 of us in this room, probably have a different vision of what would be the perfect Israel. And it isn't the way. It's an intense democracy. It is a Jewish country. It is made up of many immigrants from many different countries, and she will be what she is, and she will continue to evolve. She's not the way she was 70 years ago. She's different now. She'll be different in 5 years. She'll be different in 10 years. And the way Eric described it, to be engaged, work for the change we want, fight for the change we want, which is something that Dovid also mentioned. When you want something changed, how do you fight for change? How do you do it without criticizing and call someone an incorrigible anti-Semite? How do you do it by saying, you're not as moral as I want to be, you're not as moral a country as I want you to be, or you don't fit the definition of democracy that I want you to fit? I think American Jews have to really look at themselves. Are our kids, are our young people, our college students knowledgeable enough about Israel? Do we provide them with enough background in Zionist education? Do we in the home show love and fervor and commitment to Israel that we really should model for them? And that is something that I would say to Mr. Eisen.
There's also something oddly naive about what he said. It's as if it had a very Upper West Side response. This gets you invited to the right Shabbat dinner on Broadway, but it doesn't play well in Israel because it shows a kind of ignoring Israel's historic geographic dilemma. Historically, it doesn't have any friends around the world, but certainly in its geography. People forget, and people turn on JBS because you learn stuff. But it wasn't so long ago that Israel had only one friend in Africa, South Africa. It was a shanda, right? It was this horrible thing. How could the Jewish state, a democratic liberal state, have one friend in Africa, and it has to be the apartheid state? This was before this sort of era of the liberal Jew starting to tell the Israelis, think like us. But there was sort of quiet condemnation, except for the fact that Israel didn't have any friends in the entire continent. In the Middle East and in the Persian Gulf, Israel had one friend for many decades, the Shah of Iran. Right? I mean, today it's funny to think that there was actually some alliance between those two countries, but it was a Western country, right? Iran, in that point, and Israel shared odd Western values for that region. The people within Islamist societies, this is pre-Iranian Revolution, who could see this percolating, could see the revolution saying, you're on the wrong side of history here, Israel. You want to be with the Arabists. You want to be with the Islamists. And the Israelis are saying, yeah, we've got one friend. It's the Shah of Iran. So again, it just strikes me that it's a naive, the way Dovid laid it out, right? I'm sure that this is something Eric wouldn't agree, but Dovid laid it out, said, look, from an Israeli's perspective, here's 4 or 5 things that are huge. Mm-hmm. They look at Trump and go, is anybody watching the videotape? Right? We're condemning countries in the United Nations for their double standard against us. Not only are we not abstaining from votes, we're actually calling them out. We're withdrawing from UNESCO. We're withdrawing from UNRWA. And we're threatening the UN that if you keep doing this double standard hypocrisy, we're going to withdraw some of our money. Right? Unimaginable, right? I just, at the 92nd Street Y, had Ron Dermer on stage, and I think you'll maybe show it on JBS. But we were talking about the fact that they're naming a train station after Trump, right? Unimaginable that Penn Station isn't being changed to Trump Station, but in Israel, it's that important what they see in him, right? Now again, if you speak to liberal Democrats, they would still say Obama's still the best president Israel has ever seen, and you could make this, you can make that argument. There is an argument for that. But the optics, which is really what Dovid is talking about, are so huge. This sense of, no, there is no daylight. We are twins. This is our number one ally in that region. We share values with this country, and we're going to stand behind them. When Obama said, I always have Israel's back, that just didn't, the optics didn't look like that. And so I just think that Israel's historic geographic dilemma comes up here. And for them to look at Trump and say, well, despite all of these things that you're doing for us, we're really upset about the fact that you're not pleasing liberal Jews. And we have an allegiance to liberal Jews. And God forbid Arnie Eisen won't like us. And that's really what he's asking. And there's a kind of arrogance about that. Let me teach you who you should love.
Mm-hmm. So as you heard Dovid click it all off and you hear everything said, what are your thoughts?
2 points. We love Israel unconditionally. Betty made that point. That's absolutely true. I'm emphatic about that again and again. We don't love Israel uncritically. Those are 2 different things. And let's remember that distinction. In the same way, I love my family unconditionally. But it doesn't mean I'm not critical about members of my family. I suspect that's true for most of us. The question of how good a President Trump is for Israel is an open question. I'm the first to say that what he did on Jerusalem was very important. I was supportive of that.
You were.
A significant step that others had not taken before him.
You do know there were many Reform conservative rabbis who did not support the move.
I understand that, and I didn't agree with them. So
But where did that come from, do you think? Incidentally, I listened to all of you, and we all agree. And what I want to hear you talk about is not what you think ought to be. We all know what we would love it to be. But there's a reality right now in the American Jewish community. And although I was not comfortable, and by the way, I have enormous regard for Arnie. I didn't think he expressed it well at all. And by the way, the Israelis who were in the session all criticized him. But I do think he is putting his finger on a reality. Not so much about Trump. I don't think it has to do with Trump. I think, however, there is a disconnect between the liberal, non-observant, secular American Jew, who, by the way, thinks Trump is detestable, and the state of Israel. And I want to know the extent to which, why that is, where you think it comes from, and what Eisen says is that Trump doesn't help the situation. And I listened to what Dovid said, and he clicked off, I'm not sure, you said they were all bipartisan. I'm not sure they're all bipartisan.
We're not all bipartisan.
But I do think that those who are passionate about Israel's welfare, whether they're Republican or Democrat, would all say, good for Trump. Nikki Haley has become a rock star in the Jewish community. And there are so many things that Trump has done for Israel that have been wonderful for Israel. I do think it creates certain problems for certain Jews, certain rabbis in America, and I want to hear you talk about why that's true, and does that trouble you, irrespective?
Look, there are 2 points that I want to make here. The Iran issue is an open issue. The notion that Trump is, quote, on Israel's side on Iran is simply a premature
so we'll
statement.
Put that aside.
I absolutely don't accept it.
I understand.
I'm deeply worried about where we're going on Iran, and I oppose the direction that I perceive the administration to be moving in. Second of all, I think we need to get off Arnie Eisen. And Dr. Eisen is a wonderful guy. By the way, I looked for the original speech and couldn't find it. So I read an article in the newspaper, so I want us all to remember the extent to which that that reflected the actual reality there.
On behalf of newspapermen, no offense taken.
Right. I want to move to Ron Lauder. Lauder answers the question that you're asking. In other words, why is it that Jews are having problems with Israel now? And the answer is Ron Lauder, who's on the other side of the spectrum, who is, as he himself said very specifically, who's a conservative, who's a Republican, who's a Likud supporter, who has been a close friend of Netanyahu. Whether or not that's still the case is a little bit unclear at this second. But having said all that, Ron Lauder sort of stepped back and said, we have to look at basic issues. fundamental issues right now that are a problem, an existential problem, he really said, for Israel.
And
he named them. And B, which are dividing American Jews and Israelis. And he said it very well, and he said it with credibility because of where he stands on the spectrum. So, I mean, we can stand here and bash liberals, which you should excuse me is what I'm hearing a lot of, or we can listen to a conservative with impeccable credentials and see what he has to say, and maybe ask the question as to whether or not he's right about the points that he makes.
Okay, just finish the thought here. Incidentally, you began, and you're a liberal, and it wasn't about bashing, but you gave what I thought was a very balanced approach to the initial question. But what are the issues that Ronald Lauder is raising? In his op-ed piece in the New York Times, there were two specifically. Mm-hmm. One, he was saying that if Israel is to survive, it must find a way to implement a two-state solution.
Correct.
And then he also said the Haredi control of Judaism in Israel and the way it does act as if it is totally dismissive of non-Orthodox Judaism, and basically it's dismissive of all of American Judaism, including American Orthodoxy.
Not only that, it stifles religious freedom in Israel itself.
Yes. At the same time, he's arguing that unless Israel addresses those two issues, implements a two-state solution, and finds a way to, in essence, neutralize the ultra-Orthodox power in Israel, Israel is not going to survive.
I think it's basically, he didn't really say implement. In other words, I give Ron Lauder more credit than that. He knows the geopolitical realities. But what he was saying is they need to be moving in that direction as opposed to the other direction.
He said in his piece, Israel's future is dependent upon a two-state solution.
It's dependent on a two-state solution or moving in the direction of a two-state solution, even if it can't be implemented immediately. He wasn't saying we needed it tomorrow.
No.
He did say that needed to be the goal.
But he did say, without a two-state solution, he is worried for Israel's future.
As a Jewish state, we don't have a Jewish state. We have something else.
You think we would have something else if there's no two-state solution?
I don't think we'll have something else if there's no two-state solution.
Will it still be a Jewish state?
And I don't think Israel's future is in danger if there's no two-state solution.
And Eric's point is, as a Jewish democratic state.
As a Jewish democratic state. Look, you have, this is a dichotomy that's brought up quite a bit. I think it's a false dichotomy because both the terms Jewish and democratic are being used in the way that they're defined in the United States. You have a very complex political reality on the ground there, where effectively the Palestinians are autonomous, governing themselves in their own areas. And if you want to come along and say that there is another situation that might be preferable, it's a legitimate view to have, but it's not an option right now. There is no other party sitting across the table. There's nobody there. So to say that first of all, that this is the responsibility of Israel at this stage, I think is something I would disagree with. And I do have a great deal of respect for Ron Lauder, not just as one of the foremost philanthropists in the Jewish world who has single-handedly not just elevated and done incredible work with the World Jewish Congress, but most of the decimated Jewish communities in Eastern Europe.
He resurrected them.
Resurrected.
Almost single-handedly.
And also as someone who's dedicated his entire life to service for the Jewish community. But I think it's unfair to point the finger in Israel's direction. Israel has made incredible efforts to try and get things moving, and there's nobody home on the other side.
Is he right?
No.
Explain to him why he's wrong.
If the situation were status quo when we were saying that Israel is leaving open the option for a variety of political developments, including a two-state solution, I would say that probably reflects the unfortunate realities on the ground. That's not the situation. During Netanyahu's tenure, since 2009, setting aside his first term. He has added 50 to 60,000 settlers beyond, outside of the blocks. That is, in that territory, which, if there was ever to be a Palestinian state, would be under Palestinian sovereignty. So, in other words, what is happening now is conditions are being created which every day make it less and less likely that some kind of a two-state solution might be possible. In other words, we're eliminating options for the future as opposed to keeping them open. I believe that's what Ron Lauder was referring to. I believe that's a very serious mistake. In other words, you can have separation now and you can say the military situation will be preserved, we won't pull back any soldiers, but we're not going to add to settlements because we want to keep open the option that at some point in the future we can have two states side by side. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen and we wait. But if you keep adding settlers in what would be Palestinian territory, then you bring us in the direction of a one-state solution, which is an end to the Zionist dream, which is premised on a Jewish and democratic reality as those terms are normally used in political discourse anywhere in the world.
Look, I think you know, the question of settlements, which you're bringing up, don't preclude the scenario that we have on the ground right now, which is there is an area which the Palestinians control, and they control their own destiny within that area. We've discussed this in the past. I don't believe that it would be in Israel's interest to cede any more land to the Palestinians because of their experiences with Gaza and southern Lebanon and other places. The reason why the Palestinians are not able to vote in Israel, which is what you're suggesting, are quite obvious. They view themselves as separate and obviously would undermine Israel's viability as a Jewish state. But for them to remain in the scenario where they are now, which is, I think, the best that we can hope for, where they are effectively masters of their own fate in the areas that they control, without at the same time jeopardizing the safety of the civilian communities that live in that area and in the rest of the state of Israel, I think is the best that we can hope for at this stage.
Do you deny that Palestinian land is in fact shrinking as settlements continue to grow beyond the blocks?
I think it's wrong to use the term Palestinian land. You have disputed territory. The Palestinians claim that it's their land, and the Israelis claim that it's their land.
Are you ultimately committed to a Jewish and democratic Israel? I guess that's the heart of the matter. When I'm hearing you say yes, but then I'm hearing you define the terms in ways that don't really have any meaning. You're entitled to believe that Israel doesn't have to be Jewish and democratic. But if that's the case, I would simply ask you to acknowledge that.
I believe it should be Jewish and democratic, and I think the status quo, the way it is right now, is the best we can hope for.
So is permanent occupation an acceptable scenario for you?
I don't think occupation is a legitimate term to use in this scenario. And according to the Levy report, right, compiled by Judge Levy, not only is it not illegal or occupation under Israeli law, it's also not occupation under international law.
There's not a single country in the world that accepts that definition or accepts that report. Not the United States of America, not a single one of our European allies, not one country in the world. Now, if you want to affirm that, contrary to what, again, is generally accepted political terminology, that is your right. But let's just be aware that that's what you're doing.
It's up to the Israelis. There's no country in the world that can dictate Israel's future and make decisions that will affect the safety of her citizens. Israel only is responsible for its own destiny and can make those decisions.
Okay, as you listen to Eric and Dovid go at each other, what do you think?
Well, I think I can pick up on some of those themes. I mean, look, I've been on this show many times, your program. I have never been a supporter of the settlements. But at the same time, I wholeheartedly agree with what Dovid said, and I have been writing about this a lot lately. The word occupation is simply false. It is demonstrably and legally false. And what Eric just said is demonstrably wrong. Israel has no obligation, forget the Levy report, a military occupation, if to the extent that what you see, after the 1967 war, the Israelis had no obligation to give anything back to anybody, ever, until there were peaceful and secure borders that they could be reassured that they could live within these secure borders. Nothing has ever been demonstrated, and at least, with the exception of Oslo, and then of course Oslo itself has been violated repeatedly, would give the Israelis any sense of security that they should leave that land. That's number one. Number two, look, I'm a law professor, and I'll make this argument. We don't have time to do this. But occupation is just wrong. It is, in fact, disputed land. In my view, and I'm not alone on this, if anyone has legal title, right, because the title is so muddy, but if anyone has legal title, Israel's is probably the best title. But it's murky. It's murky for everyone. For Eric to tell your audience that no single country, I don't care about these other countries, Dovid is right. Israel is responsible for itself. And we see what other countries do. We see the politics. The United Nations just the other day, I know I'm going to give a great laugh to your audience, the Human Rights Council, I know Dovid probably reported on this, actually was blaming Israel for Syria's refugee crisis, and this 300,000, 500,000 people have been killed. It's somehow Israel's fault. So world condemnation against Israel, or world condemnation because Israel is an occupying power, is absurd. Because again, we can make this legal argument. I'm not saying it's a slam case, but it is simply not true. What happened was with Oslo, a lot of mistakes were made with Oslo, but one of the things is that we created the language of occupation, and I would argue that it was more of a concession, an accommodation. It was to say, look, legally this might not be yours, but we want to do exactly what Eric Yoffie wants to do, which is want to remain democratic, we want to remain a Jewish state, and we recognize that separation is necessary, and we are prepared to live side by side with two states, a true two-state solution. But that doesn't mean that Israel's presence in the West Bank, or in Gaza for that matter, was unlawful. And so I just think that.
But what about the growth of settlements?
Okay, let me just say this other point, which is that, and this is, look, I only know Ron Lauder through Betty, for her over the years, and I have an enormous amount of respect for everything that he's done. As you said, revived the Jewish world. Resurrected. But I will say that what I was troubled by the op-ed, and I'll get to this point, is that it reminded me oddly, I don't, this is the first time anyone has said this about Ron Lauder, sounded a lot like Obama, because the focus is really just on the Israelis. No one wants to ask this question, and I think Dovid raised it, who's on the other side? In January, when President Abbas addressed the Security Council, he referred to Israel as a colonial occupier. He said it's a colonial enterprise. That's the exact words that he used. Then he sort of recited a litany of anti-Semitic comments. We're not seeing, and we know that there is a complete distaste among the Palestinian Authority to discontinue paying terrorists stipends and tuition benefits and life insurance benefits to incentivize the killing of Jews.
Meaning they still want to do that.
They still want to do that. They have not renounced it. They think they've proclaimed that they'll never give it up.
Released a new budget this week.
Released a new budget. It's in fact increased. So I think they're now up to $400 million a year. I think it's now nearly 10% of their budget. And so they're continuing to incentivize the killing of Jews. The stabbing intifada has not changed. There's been more killings. There's more car rammings. Yes, a two-state solution from Oslo, everyone had hopes for that. But if you ask Bill Clinton, Arafat walked away from that deal. We know that Omer had the same experience. Everyone has an experience where the Palestinians demonstrate they're really not interested in statesmanship. And they're not really interested in nation building. They're only interested in eliminating the Jewish state. That's not an option for Dovid. You know, it's not, we're looking at this saying, that's not Israel's job to say, oh, you want to eliminate us? Then we agree. We should be eliminated.
Okay. That's not exactly, though, Eric's point. Eric is worried that the status quo in some way will over time compromise the democratic nature of the state of Israel and the Jewish character, because what he's arguing is at some point the Palestinian community and Western Europe and the world community could say, you know what, if Israel doesn't want to implement a two-state solution, there'll be a one-state solution.
And the Israeli left also.
Says the same thing?
There are people today on the Israeli left who make
say?
that case, who say they want one state.
Okay, which would be, from your perspective, a disaster.
A disaster.
A disaster.
I'm a Zionist.
But-
I believe in a Jewish and democratic
Yes. Well,
state.
I
But
also
the-
believe every one of us here, all five of us, would accept the notion of a two-state solution, regardless of what we think Eretz Yisrael belongs to. I believe all five of us would accept a sharing of the land if it meant an honest end of violence and sharing like Canada shares with America.
Dovid? All right, you want to ask him?
We've discussed this in the past.
I know we have.
But we've also said...
I'll exclude myself from that group.
Okay.
We've said many times here, and again, I mean, I've said this here whenever we go around the mulberry bush with this, which we do each time we meet,
Right.
that it is up to the Israelis. None of us in this room are going to make that
Okay, at this
decision.
point- okay.
No, but no, wait. I would like to go back to another point, which I think has a sort of invidious side to it, which is the results of which, or the ramifications of which, we're dealing now on other levels, and that is this term occupation, which is a misnomer, which is a wrong term, because Israel, it is an administered territories. They are
Correct.
disputed, and Israel was given the states to administer the territories. Now, what happened or didn't happen since those many, many years, because of what the Palestinians did do or did not do, deeply affected what Israel did. And so, and then the term occupation was coined, not by Israel, or maybe not by a lot of well-meaning people, but by Israel's enemies. For a certain reason, on purpose. The word occupation is loaded. Germany occupied France, Germany occupied Czechoslovakia, Russia occupied God knows how many
Georgia,
Eastern European
Ukraine.
countries. So therefore, when we use the word occupation, it has a meaning, it has a nuance, it has it implies something.
It evokes an
and
emotional
there is
reaction.
a reason that Israel's enemies keep using that.
Sharon used it.
He was wrong.
Sharon
he
used
made a
it.
mistake.
Arik
For
Sharon, the
which
man
he
of
paid
the right.
dearly, for which Israel paid dearly. I'm not finished. And the reason we're still paying, there's another aspect to that, because it puts Israel in the docket. It puts Israel in the docket in the Human Rights Council. Occupation, 5 anti-Israel resolutions because of so-called occupation. First resolution, second resolution the other day, Israel must give back the Golan Heights. Now, ask any person, ask any of those foreign ministers, UN ambassadors, representatives to the UN Human Rights Council, their presidents, their heads of state. Please, can you explain? You overwhelmingly voted for this resolution. To whom do you want to give back the Golan Heights? To Assad? To al-Nusra? To ISIS or Al-Qaeda in the region? And never mind the Jews. What do you think the Christians in the areas would think about it? And what do you think the Druze up north would think about it? What is the purpose here? And the answer is, this is anti-Israel, this is anti-Zionism, this is anti-Semitism, which is, and it affects what we have to deal with in every shape of life. It affects Israel, the bad occupier. Well, then that gives people license in France to kill an old lady, a Holocaust survivor.
Listen. I'm sorry. Finish.
I'm just saying we need to look at the bigger picture. The word occupation puts Israel in the docket, paints Israel as the Rasha, paints Israel as the bad one.
This is the usual, you should excuse me, whataboutism. In other words, we've heard all of this with the implication that what I was saying is that somehow either I support these things or I'm indifferent
No one would
to
say
the
that.
actions of the United Nations, which were an utter and complete outrage.
No one feels
or
that.
that.
No one feels that
not
about
me,
you.
Not me personally, but in
We
general.
love you, Eric.
The
No, we
notion,
know who you
The
are.
notion that believing in two states, in keeping open the option of two states, that somehow that means I am naive, I or others are naive about the realities in the world, about what is the nature of the Palestinian regime, what's happening at the UN. We should keep in mind, by the way, that all the Europeans and the European Union voted against the resolutions this time. In other words, we did better in those resolutions.
The same resolution came up in the General Assembly where they voted
Right,
for it.
The point is, nobody's naive about that. I mean, we have to be very tough, very realistic. No concessions that would compromise Israel's security. Can we do all that, still have a vision of a Jewish and democratic Israel, and still be committed to keeping that option open as opposed to expanding settlement day by day so that that option simply disappears?
As long as Israel remains in the borders that it is now, you have a democratic Jewish state. The only time this is jeopardized is if you want to bring into Israel a Palestinian population that, number one, has no right to be there, and doesn't want to be there. Unless that happens, you're safe. And when I hear people argue this, I keep saying to myself, the only reason you'd ever be worried about it is if you believe at some point in the future, the world is going to implement or insist that Israel implement a one-state solution. And people who know a lot more than I do say that that isn't done. You don't tell a country, okay, from now on your border is going to be the Jordan River.
There's a TV series going on in Israel right now, where an Israeli station is sort of examining the implications of a one-state solution. On both sides, by the way. It's going to younger Palestinians and younger Israelis. I don't know if anybody has seen any of this. It's interesting. You can get parts of it on YouTube. And they talk to young Israelis and Palestinians, and it's really quite remarkable how many of them say, enough of this already. You know, we have all these settlements. There's no way we can escape each other. We're all thrown together. We have all this friction. Let's just have a state where we're all going to have equal rights.
That's insane.
What I'm suggesting to you is this notion that this is some far-out reality on the ground.
I believe you're talking about 7 people in Israel.
No, absolutely not.
You're talking about 10.
Absolutely.
It's not a minion. It's not
absolutely.
a minion.
And the other thing to keep in mind is what's happening in the Likud party. What's been referred to as the annexation bill. It's not exactly an annexation bill. It passed the Likud party convention unanimously. The only person who did not vote was Netanyahu. And what this would do, again, unanimously accepted by the ruling party in Israel, it would apply Israeli law to Area C, which is 60% of the territories. Now, that is, in effect, an annexation bill, which is why most people call it an annexation bill, although it's not the title of the bill.
By the way, it does nothing, however, to jeopardize what you're concerned about.
Right.
No, it absolutely does.
No. If you annex Area C, you've not added any Palestinians.
No, actually, that's not true. There are Palestinians in Area C.
A handful. A handful. Your real worry is what happens if you add millions. By and I'm not saying I'm for or against annexation of C, but it doesn't impact what you're concerned about.
Well, what it does is, first of all, is it annexes a substantial amount of territory beyond the major
yes, I understand.
blocks.
But
at that point, there are many Palestinians who would reasonably conclude what is left for us is simply not enough for a viable state.
By the way, I look at it and I say to myself the following. If I'm Mahmoud Abbas, I don't make an issue about anything. I want a state. I know there's a peace movement in Israel that is very much ready to make peace with me. In Oslo, 85% of the Israeli people supported a two-state solution because they believed it would happen. They wished it would happen. 85%. I believe, Dovid notwithstanding, it's still 85%. And then when people say they're not for the two-state solution, they don't mean that. What they mean is, I'm not for it under present circumstances. So if I'm Mahmoud Abbas, I say to myself, what do you need? I need you to tell me that you're ready to live side by side with a Jewish state. Right. Call me a Jewish state, and we'll give you your state. Renounce this crazy idea that millions of Palestinians should return, not to the Palestinian state, but to Israel. Renounce, throw that away, You can have East Jerusalem. You can have control of the Temple Mount. You can have 90%, 95% of the West Bank tomorrow. By the way, we want one thing. Just as there are Arab communities, Arab cities, Arab towns in Israel, Arabs sit on the Israeli Knesset. The Israeli Supreme Court Justice is an Arab Israeli. Just as we have an Arab presence in Israel, don't tell me that your state's going to be Judenrein. So if Karnei Shomron wants to stay under a Palestinian sovereignty, but it's a Jewish enclave, give them the same right.
Under Palestinian law.
Yes. By the way, I want the Palestinians to be as generous with the Israelis who live there as Israel is generous to the Arabs who live there. We permit Arabs to maintain their own culture, their own courts, their own religion, their own schools. We expect them to obey Israeli law. But we give them the right to be Arab communities. That's all we want from the Palestinian state. If I'm Mahmoud Abbas, I say to Israel, I recognize you as an Israeli, as a Jewish state. I will renounce the law of return. And I will invite any Israeli community that wants to live inside the Palestinian state in peace. You have every right to do so. Now give me my state. If I'm Abbas, I've said it years ago. The fact that he doesn't, to me says, it's not about a two-state solution. It is honestly about from the river to the sea. And that for you to say there is Palestinian territory on the West Bank, and that that's the way the Palestinian looks at it, I know the Palestinian looks at all of Eretz Yisrael as Palestinian territory. To a Palestinian perspective, Ramallah and Nablus are no more Palestinian territory than is Haifa and Tel Aviv. And my own attitude is, you know what? I agree with those who say it's not occupation. And I certainly never use the word Palestinian territory. There is no such thing in the world, reality, as Palestinian territory. And I'm still willing tomorrow to share the land. And I would be an advocate. And I believe the Israeli people, 85% of them, would say yes tomorrow. But there's nobody offering anything near what you want, what I want, what Betty wants, what Thane wants, what Ron wants. And Dovid, you and I can have a discussion as to whether really, if 85% of the Israeli people were willing to embrace a two-state solution, whether you couldn't wait for the Messiah before all of you Judea
I'll clarify my view because it might come up again. Okay. You articulated very well why I think it's a bad idea to make this kind of commitment in advance. You're talking about a hypothetical scenario that I don't think will ever be a reality.
Ever.
If it becomes a reality, talk to me then. But I'm not prepared to commit to it in advance.
Oh, by the way, you will talk to me then, won't you?
Of course.
Okay. By the way, that opens a door at least for us, does it not, Eric?
You just left out, you had left out one thing in your list,
Please.
which is the total cessation of violence.
Yes. They have to live in peace.
The most
Without that, it's just a lie.
Because, you know, the gentleman on my right is talking about a territorial conflict. It's my belief, I think it's the belief of the majority of Israelis, that this is not a territorial conflict.
Right, of course.
And if it's not a territorial conflict, it's not solved by territorial compromise.
Well, then you've given up on a Jewish and democratic Israel.
No!
No, he has.
No, he hasn't.
I haven't.
No, he hasn't.
You're saying
And I'll tell you why.
It will never happen, and therefore there's no reason not to settle anywhere, and just assume that we're going to go with the status quo forever.
Yes.
And yes. Okay. Right. So I'm suggesting that's giving up on a Jewish and democratic Israel.
But then you're saying that Israel presently isn't Jewish and democratic. You're saying because of the situation, they've never functioned.
Look, the current legal, you're a lawyer, the current legal reality is, what's the ultimate authority in the West Bank? The military governor. The military governor.
As it should be.
As it should be.
Right now.
And the reason is because under international law, first of all, under international law, I'm suggesting it's an occupation. I know you don't like the term. I'm suggesting it's an occupation. And second of all, in an occupation, military authorities have ultimate responsibility. And three, the assumption is that it's temporary. That's the assumption. That's the premise. And that ultimately, I mean, that's why what Likud is doing is so dangerous. Because it puts an end to this structure now, which right now I affirm in the absence of alternatives, although I want settlement to stop. But the minute that you say, no, we're taking authority away from the military governor, you're saying this is no longer a temporary situation.
Correct.
Then, we're creating a new permanent reality. And that makes the likelihood of a two-state solution in a Jewish and democratic Israel as a permanent reality, that makes it very, very slight if it doesn't disappear altogether.
I'm sorry, why? I just don't understand that. If, for example, Israel annexed Area C, it's Jewish and democratic.
First of all, if
the only thing people argue, and this is the Peter Beinart argument. Peter Beinart argument is that since Israelis control Area A as well, they control the Palestinian life. Yes, they have autonomy, but an Israeli soldier can go into Area A anytime the Israeli government believes it's necessary. Others would argue that is not enough to argue that they don't have a life of their own and are not autonomous. But at the moment, what Peter Beinart says is, by keeping the Palestinians under Israeli control on the West Bank without giving them a vote, that's apartheid.
What I'm saying is this. You have to leave them a viable state.
It's over. It's over.
Part C.
That's what the three.
And I'm suggesting it's not.
No,
over. But I never
in other words, then you're giving up altogether. What I'm suggesting is Part C is 60% of the West Bank. If you annex Part C, then you don't have enough left for
You're right.
For Palestinians to feel that they have any kind of state. Their only alternative then is to, even the handful of moderates who exist, is to push for a single state. It is in Israel's interest, in America's interest, in the West's interest, in order to keep the option of a two-state reality alive, even if it's, it'll be a generation or two until somehow that might become a reality.
Can I just, we got into this mess. When Eric raised this question, which I never got a chance to answer, so I'm going to do it right now. We got into this mess because he said, in a very sober tone, he said, look, it's really about this encroachment, this sign of bad faith. The more land you take up, you're sending the message that you're not interested in a Palestinian home and that you're making it more difficult. And when at one point he turned to me, he goes, well, what about this further encroachment? And I would say, look, the Israelis, if more so than any country on the planet, have not had a problem with returning land. No country has returned more land. The Sinai Peninsula would tripled the size of Israel. Now the Egyptians live there. The southern Lebanon, Israel had pieces of that. They returned that to the Lebanese. Gaza, right, which was the other occupation, the non-occupation occupation, that was military in nature, and that had encroachment everywhere, from settlements to greenhouses, which, as we know, was a morally and emotionally devastating experience for the Israelis to return it. The Israelis returned it, and under the guidance of a former general who was the sort of housing minister for the initial settlement movement, to show you that there's no intractability or inflexibility. It's possible with the Israelis to make peace. It's possible to turn to a guy like Menachem Begin and say, show me your hand and we can make peace with Egypt. Sharon, yes, he made a mistake. He shouldn't use the word occupation. But the fact that it was Sharon, right, if anyone is going to use those words, that Sharon would. So when Eric keeps focusing on the encroachment, I look at the encroachment, I was saying, and this was my point about Ron Lauder's piece, which is encroachment, that's not what this problem is about. That is not the cause of this.
Galilee.
Right. So if you're not going to focus on Palestinian violence, Palestinian rejectionism, Palestinian glorification of martyrdom, glorification anthem singing from the river to the sea, Palestinian stipends and terrorist payments, the idea of the renunciation of the violence and the dream of the Nakba's reality, which is to reclaim all of Israel. I just think that focusing on these additional settlements, which I don't approve of, but is not the reason that we don't have a two-state solution.
Look at the Galilee. You know what the Jewish percentage of the population is in the Galilee?
Do you know, Dovid? What is it?
43%. In the 70s, there was a Jewish majority in the Galilee, and it's been going down ever since.
But not as Israel as a whole.
Now,
Israel as a whole?
No, what I'm saying is, look at the Negev. Look at the Galilee. The Jewish population is concentrated overwhelmingly in the center of the country. There's plenty of room. Israel doesn't have to be building those settlements. You need to fill the Galilee. Let me say this. You need to fill the Galilee with Jews. And you need to fill the Negev with Jews, where there's tremendous growth of the Bedouin population. Or otherwise, what you're going to end up with is a huge Jewish metropolis in the middle of the country and a binational canton in the south and the north.
What do you say to that?
I think we need to have a big aliyah. I think that's the responsibility of diaspora Jewry. It is. There's a mitzvat yishuv haaretz. There is an obligation.
Who are you talking to?
I am talking to all kinds of Jews, whether they live in America, in Beverly Hills and in comfort, or whether they live, or they live in France where things are getting difficult, or they live someplace else. It's very hard to look. I have now been working with many different Jewish communities for a long time, and I know very well it is very hard to uproot people and move people. It really is. But at the end of the day, part of the Zionist dream was also coming to live in Israel.
Okay, but most American Jews, including all 5 of us, are very happy to live here, live Jewish lives here, and support Israel. You live in America now.
I live here now.
Are you a
but
citizen?
I'm not American.
Are you a citizen here?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
By the way,
I hope I stay on the right side of the wall.
At the moment,
A Rosenzweig.
at the moment, could you see yourself making aliyah?
At some point.
Could you see yourself making
I've,
aliyah?
Yes, I could.
Yes. Both
I don't want to
of
be
you
buried in this country.
could.
But nobody
No.
here is saying,
No.
I don't think anyone is here saying, and we've never even talked about this on your show, but let's take the West Bank out. Let's talk about what Eric wanted to introduce here. If the birth rate situation, so the Arab population grew from 20% of the population to 40% of the population.
That's not happening right now.
No, not now. But I'm saying I don't think anyone in this room would say that the Israelis would have to forcibly change their democratic character to reflect the fact that the birth rate has changed, and so that when the Arab population votes, they simply have a larger percentage of people in the Knesset. I think that many, at least I'm speaking this way, that would be from the Jewish state, the character of the Jewish state, which would be very unfortunate, but that's the breaks, because in a democracy, that's what would happen. And so when we're talking about the idea of a mass aliyah, that is, when Eric is talking about the Galilee problem, that is a fundamental demographic challenge for the Israelis.
But it's for the Israelis to worry
Right,
about.
it is for the Israelis,
Yes.
but that's a non-West Bank issue. That's
No, it is a West Bank issue. Why is so much effort and time going into increasing the population of the West Bank, which maybe someday, they will live in a Palestinian reality, when in fact Jews are needed in the Galilee and in the Negev?
Yeah, you're saying there's a political reason there, and that
it's politically short-sighted, and there are real issues of, for example, the Arab population in the north, Israeli Arabs, full citizens of Israel, demanding greater levels of autonomy than they currently have, because they feel that they're entitled to it, and they already have a majority. Now, that could present a very complicated and difficult political problem for Israel.
That is inside Israel.
That's exactly.
In an organic way.
So therefore, let's focus on those communities inside Israel and not worry about sending people into the settlements.
We only have a few moments left. I want to ask you a different question. What's more important to you, a Jewish Israel or a democratic Israel?
To me, the two go hand in hand. I don't see a separation there. Like I said, Jews as a people in general are a very intense democracy. I don't see I don't see Jews in any way, shape, or form wanting to not have a democracy in any way.
Okay.
I think.
So okay, your answer is you want both, and it does not occur to you that there ever could be a demographic problem to Israel being both.
No, I don't think so, because if you look at the statistics, which we have not even talked about, the birth rate of the Jewish population is growing in Israel, and the birth rate of the Arab population in Israel is declining.
Okay.
No one has talked about that.
How do you answer the same question?
I just think well, I would like it to be a Jewish state, but I don't think it's an either-or question, because the Arab population in the Middle East has not demonstrated a taste for democracy. So it's not possible to, you're not going to have a democracy. You would end up with an Arab theocracy in Israel. You're not going to get a democracy. If the demographic challenge was such that the Arab, you'd have exactly what you had in Gaza. You would have a takeover by an Arab group, and you would have a theocracy.
Is there a democracy in the Arab world?
No. I mean, other than Turkey, which is a joke. So
how would you answer the same question? Is it more important for you to have a Jewish state or a democratic state in Israel?
I think both are exceptionally important.
Okay.
I'm gonna, you know, it's the way that it should be. And,
okay, and I know your answer.
Yeah.
You've been saying this for years here, and you are eloquent. Okay, so and you can now all attack me.
Okay.
I have no problem at all saying that if, I don't ever want to have to choose, but if I had to choose, I choose Jewish over democratic in a heartbeat. That's why Israel was created.
No.
Yes, it was. Israel was created as the Jewish state in a sea of Arab Muslim states. And Israel did what no other Arab Israeli state said, Arab Muslim state said. Anybody who's not Jew, you're welcome to be here too. In the biblical model of the Ger Toshav, you'll get all the rights you want. By the way, we're even going to extend citizenship to you, and you'll have voting rights. But we expect one thing from you, that you'll be an Israeli citizen who supports and is a loyal Israeli who does sing Hatikva knowing that the phrase is Nefesh Yehudi. Yes, you're welcome to be here as long as you can sing Nefesh Yehudi, the soul of the Jew, because that's what this place is, and you're welcome. Anybody is welcome. Anybody. But you must sing Nefesh Yehudi, or there's a lie. And what you're really doing here is saying you don't want this to be a Jewish state. And I don't see any state in the world that commits that kind of potential theoretical suicide. That's suicide. So I want you to know I am different from all four of you. For me, I want Israel to be a Jewish democratic state where every non-Jew who's a loyal citizen gets the vote the same as every Israeli Jew. But if I had to choose, given why there is an Israel, for me there's no question in the world. I want it to be a Jewish state. If it has to be one or the other, I want it to be a Jewish state, not a democratic state. I didn't see Israel created as a Hebrew-speaking democratic state in the Middle East, which, by the way, has a Jewish component to it. No, 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 no. This was the Jewish homeland for the Jewish people, whether they come or not. Everybody's welcome, but you got to do one thing. You got to be a loyal citizen. If you're not a loyal citizen, you don't belong here. I understand that my position is in the minority, even to you. But I want you to, I want the audience to have heard at least one voice say, Israel is essential to Jewish life. It is the Jewish state.
The only way to assure that
We
is
all
with a
agree with
stable Jewish majority.
I agree.
And therefore, Israel must be certain that it has a stable Jewish majority. And let me suggest, look, Israel came into being as a modern phenomenon rooted in biblical and traditional values. It was created by Theodor Herzl and the Zionist movement. Read The Jewish State. It is absolutely unthinkable to Herzl or to Ben-Gurion or to Begin or to Jabotinsky or to any of them that Israel would not be Jewish and democratic in the commonly accepted sense of both terms.
And I believe Ben-Gurion, Jabotinsky to be sure, Begin to be sure, and I believe most of the labor prime ministers we've had would say exactly what I've said. That in the ideal, we're talking about the ideal now, what's the ideal vision? The ideal vision is the non-Jew is welcome as a full citizen, but he's got to accept the idea
But in the
of Nefesh
in
Yehudi.
the absence of a stable Jewish majority, you have no way of assuring
yes.
that unless you impose it through non-democratic means.
And I accept.
And you're prepared to impose it through non-democratic means.
I never went that far.
But that's the clear implication of what you're saying.
Yes, by the way,
Okay.
it is. It is. It is.
You've established your position. Fair enough.
Yes, it is.
I'm down with that too.
You've changed your
No,
mind?
you're saying, look, I'm with you on that.
Yes, no, you're correct. I hope it never gets there. And I also know that if it does get there, there are bigger problems facing not simply Israel, but world Jewry. Anyway, any comment?
I'm not surprised you said that, and I think that if you forced each of us, including Eric, we get the concept, Mark, that there's one country in the world. In the aftermath of the Holocaust, there was a message that the world even understood to some degree. It's not true, as the Arabs say, this was created as a compensation for the Holocaust. There's a partial truth that's not true. There's so many other equities and moral and legal issues, but we recognize its moral imperative that there be a Jewish homeland. And I think that all of us, if forced to choose, would follow you on that.
I think Mark is talking about more than a moral imperative. I think Mark is talking about historic and spiritual and something that's really at the core of Jewish identity. That's
right.
what I think.
I think I would think we'd all.
Then I think everybody buys into that, Mark.
Okay,
Yeah.
I hope. I'm going to ask you, Dovid. We come back to the end because we have to wrap it up very quickly. The initial question was, is American Jewry alienated more from Israel because of Donald Trump's being president? And your bottom line is?
It shouldn't be.
Is it?
It might be, but it shouldn't be.
Bottom line for you.
No, I said that it has other causes.
It's not Trump.
No, it's not Trump. It's the failure is not in our stars, but in ourselves.
What do you say?
Trump's a terrible president, but the answer to your question is no.
By the way, what about Dovid mentioning all the things he's good for Israel about?
I told you I have
Leave Iran
severe
out of it.
doubts
Leave
about
Iran out of
Iran, but beyond that, I didn't have a problem with his list.
Okay, but the fact that he's good for Israel, he's still a terrible president?
Overall, I think he's a terrible president for America. Yes, that's what I believe.
So we have now a president who's bad for America and good for Israel.
To some extent. How good ultimately he will be on Israel will be very much dependent on issues such as Iran.
And are you willing to say the same is true about how good he'll be as an American president for America? Is it possible this guy can grow?
I hope and pray every day. I'm not optimistic.
Yes. By the way, I feel you have been one of the more open in the Jewish community to that possibility.
I praise him on occasion.
You have?
I praise him on occasion.
Wrap it up. What's your answer?
I mean, the people who feel alienated from Israel, who are American Jews, to the extent to which whatever that number is, the statistics, they felt that way during the Obama years. I just don't think that number has changed to the extent to which it exists. I think it's an exaggerated number. A number of years ago, I reviewed a book for the Washington Post that took the position of that, the Jewish organized institutional community is out of touch with mainstream Judaism that has problems with Israel. But when you do the Pew poll, most Jews that you speak to, they do support Israel, and they don't blame Israel for the failure of the two-state solution. They get the general concept. So to the extent to which there's alienation, I mean, Trump is a cause of it for some group of liberal Jews, but it's already there. It was already baked in, as they say. And it's something that is a challenge for institutional leaders like Betty. But it's not something that I think is only caused by Donald Trump in the last 12 months.
I'd like to end on a note of gratitude, if I may, because I think, again, as I said before, no president was just an absolute walk in the park. There were always issues. And we did have them with the Obama administration, but it ended on something very good, which was the $38 billion package assuring Israel's security for many years. And that, I think, maybe it got eclipsed by the UN resolution at the end, but that was very important.
But you can't say it as if it's an aside.
It's not an aside. It was really monumental.
What happened at the UN was horrific. And
nobody feels that more than me.
Okay.
I've worked in the UN many, many years, and I understand that. But we have to look at what we did achieve, and that was important. And the issue.
So it's a mixed bag.
It's always a mixed bag. It's always a mixed bag. That's what I'm trying to say. Look what we have today. You have Mr. Trump, you have Mr. Pence, you have Ms. Haley, now you have Mr. Bolton, and you have Mr. Pompeo. I don't think I've ever seen such a pro-Israel lineup.
Yes, but Eric's
and sometimes
point is,
it's really astonishing.
It could be good for Israel and bad for America.
Anything could happen because every day we have something new coming out of this administration. So I would be more optimistic and say there can be growth, there can be change, it could be for the good. And that's what I'm really hoping, because it has been very unexpected and different things come out every day. So let's look at the glass half full, and let's keep praying that things will stop wringing our hands so much, and appreciate and hope and expect that things will be better.
That's a wonderful way to end. I cannot thank the four of you enough. It is always so wonderful to hear your give and take. It is so lovely of you to be willing to be as forthright with our audience. And I've said many times, it is not everywhere that you have the opportunity to hear this kind of dialogue that you do on JBS. And it's because of you. I thank you so much.
Oh, you bring it out
Thane,
in us.
Betty, Dovid, Eric, thank you very, very much. There you have it, the thoughts of Thane Rosenbaum, Betty Ehrenberg, Dovid Efune, and Eric Yoffie. I hope you have enjoyed it as much as I have. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have to any of the ideas expressed on this edition of L'Chaim. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook page, or tweet me. I look forward to hearing from many of you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'Chaim, my friends, to life.
L'Chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.